Howdy, y'all. So we're picking up with our second kind of mini lecture. This one's looking at René Robert Cavelier Sieur de La Salle, or we'll just call him La Salle. So he is a French explorer, and he's going to inadvertently be the first European, and his group is going to be the first French Europeans and Europeans in general to settle in Texas. So this is kind of the beginning of Texas settlement by Europe, by non-Native Americans. So let's look at the French real quick briefly, just kind of give an idea of where they're at in North America and how La Salle ended up in Texas. So you can kind of see everything in green is kind of first beginnings of French settlement, then they expanded towards the Great Lakes in orange, and then eventually the French will claim everything in yellow all the way down the Mississippi River towards what becomes New Orleans. And you kind of see that little yellow dot right on the coast of Texas. That was La Salle's failed expedition, but we'll get to that in a second. So if we zoom in a little bit more up close to Canada, you see Quebec and Montreal in blue. These are the two main French cities. This is like the heart of French settlement in North America. While the British had lots of people settling in North America, the French never really settled in large numbers. They tended to intermarry with Native Americans and kind of exert influence that way over Native Americans rather than trying to settle lots of French people themselves. While the British brought lots of people over of all different classes, the French never really settled in the same numbers. So the first major French settler or explorer is Jacques Cartier, and he was looking for something called the Northwest Passage. Because remember, Columbus, like we read about and we've learned about all our lives, was trying to get to Asia and India to get to spices and have a faster trade route. But he ran into North America. He didn't plan on that. So people like Jacques Cartier and other explorers are still looking for this Northwest Passage, thinking, well, there has to be some way around North America to get to China, to get to Japan or India quicker. So he's exploring and they think, oh, we found the St. Lawrence River. Maybe this is the path. They're like, nope, nope, this doesn't look like it. Then they hit the first of the Great Lakes. Like, oh, we did it. We found the ocean again. Then it narrows and they hit the next Great Lake, next one, the next one. Finally, they hit 5 Great Lakes. And they're like, oh, crap, we ran out of Great Lakes. But they do find eventually the Ohio rivers, the Arkansas rivers, and down into eventually the Mississippi River and back into the Gulf of Mexico. And this is where La Salle kind of comes into the story. So you can see La Salle made several different expeditions. So down the Ohio River, down the Great Lakes and Illinois River, eventually down the Mississippi River. Now, New Orleans is marked on this map, but it hasn't been founded by the time La Salle is exploring. So what we're looking at is kind of the future. And La Salle realizes this spot at the mouth of the Mississippi is going to be crucial for the colonization of this area, of what becomes Louisiana. So when he returns back to France, he tells the king, tells everybody, okay, we've got to do this. We've got to settle this spot. So they say, okay, here are 4 ships. Here are several hundred settlers. Go settle. He's supposed to settle what should become New Orleans. But he gets a little off track, and you kind of see in purple. He doesn't take the most direct route, hitting Florida, going around, following the coast till you hit the Mississippi. Instead, he kind of goes through Spanish territory, some French territory, amongst the Caribbean islands, goes around Cuba, which is controlled by Spain, not necessarily allies all the time with France, and eventually he misses the Mississippi and arrives on the coast of Texas, although we don't know it as Texas yet. So he begins settling there, and they don't really, he's like, maybe this is it. Eventually they realize it's not the right river. They settle at a place called Matagorda Bay, so it's kind of where present-day Victoria is in Texas, if you know where Victoria is. So here's René Robert Cavelier Sieur de La Salle. So this is the great explorer that has magically and unpredictably settled in the wrong spot, but accidentally became the first settler in Texas, at least the first European settler in Texas. Now, this first colony that he's going to set up, Fort St. Louis, this is not a happy place. He lost 1 ship of the 4 ships. He lost 1 to pirates on the way. Another one gets damaged. By the time he makes it to Fort St. Louis, he has about half the people he started with, half the ships. And when they arrive, they do the smart thing. They send one ship back to, or kind of smart, they send one ship back to kind of inform France of the location of the fort, although it's never really a big fort, it's more just a big house, of the location of this new colony, this new settlement, while the ship that remains, they take apart and use it as building supplies. So you kind of see this artist rendition of Fort St. Louis. Now, the fort in this one is a little more robust than what it probably was. It was really just basic timber building with buffalo hides kind of stretched across the roof. So not exactly a robust defensible position. And what's worse is right where he settled, kind of the Houston, Victoria kind of coastline, is like we talked about in the earlier lecture, right where those Karankawas live. The Karankawas, remember, they're not happy people. They have this hard life. Every time they try to move inland, the other Indian groups, other Native Americans, push them back to the coast. They have to hunt alligators, wear their fat to keep the mosquitoes off. This is not a great thing. So a bunch of French guys show up, start saying, this is our land, start claiming stuff. Well, the Karankawas and the French don't get along at all. And there's a lot of fights, a lot of violence, and La Salle and his settlers keep saying, okay, well, this clearly is not a good spot. So they keep looking around, exploring, trying to find the Mississippi. They launched 3 separate expeditions trying to discover or rediscover the mouth of the Mississippi. On the 3rd expedition, so you see Fort St. Louis, 3rd expedition, they're marching around trying to find where the Mississippi might be. Finally, the rest of his crew has enough, and they mutiny and they murder La Salle. They just straight up kill him, bury him, and move on. So somewhere on the border of Texas, you kind of see where that eastern border of Texas would be, there is the bones of La Salle somewhere out there. Now, the remaining guys at Fort St. Louis, they have a choice. They can either try to tough it out, which the Indians aren't making it easy, so they decide, let's just go home. Well, the problem is, they don't have a ship anymore. So the only way to get home would be to march all the way across. So to go from Fort St. Louis up kind of the Arkansas River eventually, find the Mississippi, work their way all the way back up, either take the Ohio River back to the Great Lakes or the Illinois River up to the Great Lakes. So they're having to walk across the entire continent, the entire North American continent, to get from the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes. Odds are not in their favor. But surprisingly, months later, 2 of these crew members, wild looking, bushy, smelly, big beards, stumble out of the woods and they see a French fort and they walk up. Now the French guards at the fort start yelling at them like, who are you? What's going on? They don't recognize them. And then these guys start speaking French to these soldiers at the fort, and they're like, oh my God, you're La Salle's guys. And this is how we know what happened with La Salle, because these guys made it all the way back to French Canada and began telling his story, his ill-fated story of the first settlement in Texas. So you can kind of see the French have this big push coming south. It takes a little while before they finally get New Orleans established, but nonetheless. Now the Spanish are coming in at Florida and basically Texas all the way over to California, so New Mexico, Arizona as well. And the English and Dutch settle in the eastern part of the United States, and the Dutch very quickly, mainly New Amsterdam, which become New York, gets purchased and given to the English later on. But we'll stop there for today, now that we've learned a little bit about La Salle's ill-fated settlement of Texas. So, see you on the next video.